something you saw in which someone talks about what was found in the latest study, because the latest study is always the most interesting one. It's always the most shocking one, but it's also potentially the most useless one.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
All right, welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barban. With me is Brad Pilon, and today we're going to talk about how do you know if scientific research or information you're hearing that's supposedly based on science is worth following? Is it worth you taking action on it? Is it something that's a headline, but it's not necessarily for you? I mean, Now that we can look up just about anything online, you can find a lot of papers now are published in a way where you don't have to pay for them. You can just grab them online.
Yeah.
So there's a certain amount of information you can get your hands on and like publish research specifically. But then how do you know, does it pertain to you? Is it worth taking action on? Like you may read something and think, oh, I got to change my diet. I have to add in a nutrient. I got to cut a nutrient. I got to switch the timing of my meals or switch the way you work out. But how do you know if it actually applies to you?
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem is that a lot of people, you rely on the news or, X or Instagram or TikTok or something you saw in which someone talks about what was found in the latest study, because the latest study is always the most interesting one. It's always the most shocking one, but it's also potentially the most useless one because it's the latest study. And they don't really talk about the total body of evidence, which is really, really important, right? They just focus on one specific time point, one specific study in one specific group of people. And that can have disastrous results if we take that to replace an entire body of evidence behind it.
Right. So the key thing here, as Brad said, it's the weight of evidence or the body of evidence.
Yeah.
So any one study, fine, it could say something you want to hear, but it doesn't necessarily mean all the research points in that direction. And the reason we even talk about weight of evidence is because it over time will account for variables that no one study can really account for.
Yeah. So great example for that. I was just helping my mom clean out her house, and we found a confidential school psychological services report on yours truly, right? And this was done in grade 10, and it was concerned that I wasn't doing as well as I should be in school, and it was a very damning report. It was one of the only times I've ever seen my mom mad. And my mom, she's a sunshine warrior. So for her to be mad, when I came in the house, I could just feel the vibe. I'm like, oh, what did Chris do today? Right? Like my brother messed up.
Not you.
And my dad looked over and he's like, you're on your own. And I was like, oh no, because my dad's throwing me the heavy. So my dad was checking out. I'm like, I'm so screwed. But anyway, it was this report. And it was all about how, coming out of a gifted program, I wasn't doing as well as I should have in high school. And, it was just damning that I wasn't trying and all that kind of stuff. The report is correct on the data she gathered, but what she was missing was in that specific circumstance, right? I just did grade 5 through grade 8 in a gifted program. Then I got into Gen Pop high school, right? So I'm trying to get rid of
Gen Pop.
Yeah. So I'm like Steve Urkel coming into the main, like I'm trying to be cool, right? Trying to reinvent myself. And I spent 2 years trying to reinvent myself. And then in the middle of Ancient Civilizations grade 10 class, the teacher's like, Pilon, there's like a psychologist coming to assess you from the gifted program. And I'm like, right? Like you just undid all the work I did. So
because at this point, no one really knew.
No, and I was trying to do that, right? Like, just made me so mad. So I walked in this meeting like pissed, right? And I'm trying to undo everything. So she's asking me, hey, like, why aren't you applying yourself? And I'm like, why would I? Right? Like, I'm like, I'm going head to head with you, right? And she's like, well, don't you care about the future? I'm like, oh, of course not. Like, I'm in grade 10.
Isn't that the attitude you're supposed to have here in Gen Pop?
Back in the 90s, right? You had to be cool. I was growing out dreadlocks. Like, come on, right? And so the interesting thing is the report doesn't reflect the concept that was just one really bad day, right? That they had pissed me off, that I was in a mood, and I was not going to give them any of the answers they wanted, right? So we had like these, I'm going to call them toys, like blocks you had to play with and how quickly you could solve them. Dude, I took my time, right? I was like, I'm going to see how long I can make this lady sit here, and I'm just going to fiddle with this. Like, it was It was not. I mean, in retrospect, considering the lashing I got from my mom, was not a good idea.
Right.
But the point is, from a research point of view, the most latest study was not good because it was skewed data based on circumstances without outside of the control of the people who are analyzing this data, people who are reviewing this data. I mean, this went all the way up to the school board and back down, right? So a lot of people saw that data. A lot of people kind of made their opinions opined on that data, but none of them knew the story behind it. And that happens all the time in nutrition research too, right? You catch people the one day they have to come in to do their lab. So, John, you've got to come in for my study. I need you here next Thursday to do your blood work. And you're like, absolutely, no problem. I got this. I'm like, hey, we're studying triglyceride levels. And you're like, hey, I got it. You completely forget that Wednesday is like your niece's wedding. You're going to the wedding. And I'm going to ask you at my study, I'm like, hey, dude, so last night, like you stopped eating around 8, right? And you're going to be like, yeah, of course I did. So I can't account for the one thing that you're basically just covering for yourself. Now, this is the benefit of having a large group in that study, but it's also the benefit of having multiple studies and the multiple body of evidences, right? And so because sometimes you can do a study where it's not just the one guy who is at a wedding. You know, a lot of these studies are done at universities and university settings. So, for instance, you know, you have an NCAA college football championship happening at the same time you're doing your research. There's going to be 1 week that data point's going to be messed up. Do you remember I was doing a trial way back, and being Canadian, I wasn't very smart. I did over American Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what a complete waste of data. A weight loss trial. And I couldn't figure out why they were just this week. Everything went crazy. And because in Canada, we celebrate Thanksgiving with like a 1-day dinner with your family. It's not like a
sort of. And it's earlier. It's early mid-October.
It's earlier. There's no football involved, right? And so that entire subject group's data was messed up by something that I didn't account for. Now, anyone in the U.S. is like, it's because you're an idiot. But as a Canadian, there was no reason to think anything was going on that week. So these things happen, which is why it's the total body of evidence that matters. So there always going to be a trial coming out saying like, hey, you know, new study shows that actually eating protein degrades muscle mass. Because I'm sure there's going to be one that one day comes out and something's missed in a peer review, and that happens. But instead of freaking out, you go, yeah, but there's like a couple hundred studies showing the opposite, that the protein is supportive of
one study doesn't undo the weight of evidence. No. Now, when you dig into it, it might have a clue as to something the other studies haven't quite accounted for, or you might uncover a confounding variable that is such a big deal that it's obvious why it doesn't jive with the rest of the weight of the evidence. But it's never going to be 100% of studies, no matter how they're designed, are always going to say the same thing.
No.
But like Brad said, the more studies pointing in the same direction, the more you can reasonably say, okay, that has to be an effect. Something's got to be going on here, because even though within one study you randomize to account for variability amongst those people, to Brad's point, it doesn't account for variability like year to year, or just, well, this was a group of people in one region of one country at one time, and they all could have been expressing some sort of variable we weren't accounting for until we studied a bunch of people somewhere else.
Oh, like I think about it so again, a lot of these research studies are done during the school year. So and you and I have done some extensive researching into the effect of temperature on a lot of physiological parameters. So what if the trial I did was during one of the coldest winters on record, and the trial you did was in one of the warmest? Does that affect the outcome? Even though it wasn't about weather, we expected people to walk to our labs to get their blood drawn. Maybe that had an effect. So you have to look at, again, the totality of research. But to your point, that doesn't mean you can't just throw out the new paper that disagrees with everything, because a new paper may have been, to your point, designed to test one of those hypotheses. Right? Be like, wait, no, when you actually run the stats this way, you get a different answer. So,
and the other issue is studies with catchy headlines get posted pretty quickly online, and I mean, we get them sent to us daily. People, what about this? Here's another one. We had people just we've asked them to, and now they just send us stuff. I mean, we have a couple of aggregators going into our email feeds about certain journals, but in general, you just couldn't keep up with all of them. But they all sound compelling, but unless you take the time to go through the research, and not just that paper, but all the other papers, how do
All
you
papers,
know? Like, simple, should you take B vitamins or not? Should you take methylated B vitamins or not? Should you take omega
Seems easy,
3s?
but yeah.
Should you take omega 3s or not? How do you know? I mean, you could spend a month trying to come to the answer on just one of those questions.
Right.
And you'd need to do significant research to figure out if the available data actually really does apply to you.
Yeah.
Not to mention,
have
you measured yourself to know if you even fit? Like, does it even matter? Do you even know your levels of B vitamins and omegas? Do you even need them?
Yeah.
So every study that comes out is like, oh, new study says, can sound compelling, but it's not immediately obvious if it's anything you should do anything about.
Yeah. I don't know if people know this or not, but the headlines, the title of the article, the title of the news article you read, that is written by a title writer.
Yep.
Right. So the article, whether it's an actual scientific article or a news report about that article, is written by one person who probably dug into it and really tried their best to review it. And then someone gets that across their desk and goes, okay, I need a title to get people to click on. It's a completely different person with a completely different objective. It's like, what will get people to click? But the title can affect your framing and biases as you read the paper, which is an issue. Another thing I'd like to talk about is I always get that whole facts don't care about your feelings thing. And I always think about that because the other issue is the facts, or we'll call it data. Data is only as good as the person interpreting it. Yep. Right? Unless you're looking at the raw data, it's only as good as the person interpreting that data. And if you're interpreting it with, not the skill set needed or biases or anything, then it's like, well, facts don't care about your feelings and the truth doesn't care about your interpretation of the facts. Like it's really odd. It just needs to be the data. And sometimes the person interpreting it for you on your behalf, even in the research trial itself, is doing it incorrectly. So that's why we have to rely on the body of evidence, because that typically means more than a few people have done this, more than a few people have done the peer review process, which is like, I look over John's work to make sure there's no mistakes. John looks over mine. Like, technically, it shouldn't be us. It'd be people who don't know us, but you get the idea. They get fact checked. The more variety in papers, the more variety in different labs. So if they're all coming out of McMaster down the street from me, that's different than if I'm like, wow, there's actually a dozen studies, from a couple from Mac, a couple from UCLA. Like it changes when it's different universities, studies done at different times, maybe some different interpretations or data analysis. That's strength, right? That's validity. If it's just one lab, even if it's 12 studies, if it's all from one lab and it's all from me and my 3 grad students, that's different, because I'm using the same biases, the same interpretation, the same statistical analysis, right?
You could be continually making the same error that has yet to be caught by a different lab, which we've had firsthand experience with that. We know that's a thing.
Oh yeah.
Where an entire department can actually be making a recurring error, not just
by using the wrong stat to analyze something. So it's they're not doing it on purpose, right? They think they're doing it the right way.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that even could be country. Like one country does it a certain way, but then another country's doing the same area of research. Well, we don't analyze it that way, and they come up with something slightly different. So it just, I mean, what's the take home message here? If you're going to take action on anything you hear in the media about diet or fitness or anything health related, first of all, if it just because new study says, that's fine. That's one data point, not good enough of a reason for you to take action. But if it sounds like something you're concerned about, then maybe you start the investigation into the weight of evidence. I mean, I suppose you could ask us here and we could help at least guide you. We give what we know and then point to other resources we think are useful. But this isn't obvious. This isn't easy.
No.
You don't it's not a kitchen sink thing to do preventative medicine, health, fitness, any of this stuff. Because you could, at worst, you could actually be causing harm. And making whatever you're trying to affect in your body, you could actually be making it worse if it's really not meant for you. And at the least, you're just wasting time. Yeah, and maybe wasting money and resources. But still, though, if you're going to take action at all, you want to be pretty sure it's likely the action that's best for your body. So so it's not just Oh, I heard about that. I'm doing it. You
Yeah.
need to do a little bit more research into that. Like, for example, I started a particular supplement for a particular cholesterol that I have that's too high. If you guys have watched any of our episodes, you know I have high LP(a). But it took me a year to figure out what's best for me. And this is with blood tests and all kinds of measurements. And then a niacin supplement, found out a dose, found out the side effects, found out other supplements to overcome those side effects, balance them out. But that took like a year.
Yeah.
Just to come down to two supplements I take regularly to manage it all. But that's like a year of experimenting, a year of research, and a year of testing. Like, that's for one thing.
Right.
And one other thing to deal with that thing's side effects. The minute
Yeah.
I add one more thing, it's like another 6 months of research to figure out if I'm not messing up something I've just solved and now I've undone it. So
Yeah.
I don't think too many people do that, like spend that much time trying to sort it out. They just think, oh, vitamin D is good, I'm going to take that. Oh, what fish oil is good, I'm going to take that too. And it's like, oh, I'm going to take that too. But at some point, that might actually start working against you. And then same thing with an exercise routine. You start adding in certain things. Well, I'm going to do VO2 max training, but now I'm going to do HIIT training, but I got to get my squat better. And now I'm going to pull sleds because Brad likes pulling sleds. And then all of a sudden you have plantar fasciitis and you've separated a shoulder or whatever. So it's got to fit for you in your lifestyle, and the weight of evidence has to at least suggest it's good for however you're going and however you're made up. But that's going to take time. So just don't rush into anything, no matter how good it sounds. Take the time to do some research and figure out, is it really fit for me or not?
And I would also suggest, if you want to fast track the process, whether it's personal trainers or medical doctors, I would go with skills over theory. And what I'm saying there is, if the theory is vitamin C causes lipolysis, therefore vitamin C is great for weight loss. But if you go to a doc who works with weight loss people all the time, and he's like, I've told dozens and dozens of people to take 3 or 4 grams of vitamin C, it does not do anything relevant. And that's someone who, even though the theory is there, they have the skill from the experience to be like, no. Or a personal trainer, I'm going like, oh, I've read this study, and if I change my foot position it'll activate my quads more. And he's like, I've worked with dozens of people who will not make a difference, because it might be significant scientifically, but it's not relevant real world. So practicing medical doctors, practicing personal trainers, people who are sort of in the trenches in that specific area are a great resource, because they will give you the skill or expertise versus the theory. And that's always
So instead of winging it, which Brad's saying, if you're really serious about it, enlist some help here to know, is that worth it for me or not?
Yeah.
Well, it could save you a lot of wasted time and effort.
Exactly.
All right. I don't know. Do you got any more? I think that's actually a pretty good place to leave it.
Yeah. So just total body of evidence, skill over theory, or experience over theory. When you want to know, like, does it actually do anything? If there's people who've already tried it, it's like, that you trust, it's a good way to go. And just not avoid, but understand that headlines are made to catch your eye, not necessarily to reflect the contents of the article.
Yeah. That's a good point. All right. So that's a good place to leave it. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barban, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.